Welcome to this afternoon's panel, What's the Secret Formula? We'll get into introductions in a bit, but I thought the first thing we'd do is, let's watch a movie. Let's watch a little movie. So if you could kill the lights, and I can get the movie going.
Broder Ansgar?
Ja.
Det er deg, ja.
Ja.
Så bra, ok.
Ja, hei du. Hei du. Ja.
Ja, hva gjelder det?
Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte?
Takk.
Ja.
Jaha.
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddag, jeg.
Nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid, og så skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang.
Ja.
Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller?
Nei, den bare ligger der.
Okay. Har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Ja, åpne den? Altså, hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei.
Vil du ha en kopp og en vann?
Nei, det skal være fort gjort, det skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er du i gang.
Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner, inni her så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså?
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake, da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen. Tar tak der, og så sånn. Der. Så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde sagt. Ikke noe...
Ok, så den slutter der,
ja.
Og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene.
Ja?
På den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket der, ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå, altså?
Nei, alt ligger lagret inni her nå.
Ja.
I tilfelle du setter fyr på hele greia, det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk.
Ja.
Ja, whatever.
Det er greit.
Ja, men du, en til før du går. Jeg må bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner...
Ja.
Sånn,
ja, riktig.
Og så, hva du kalte det?
Blar.
Jeg blar.
Ja, blar videre.
Blar frem og tilbake.
Ja, teksten ligger der hele tiden.
Ja, og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Oi.
Flott.
Fint det.
Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, du har det fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det, altså?
Ja, du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpen.
Ja vel.
Har du lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Jeg skal følge med som manualen, så brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Ja, den, ja.
Står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Åpnet den.
Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt på.
Den, ja.
Står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke den, ja.
Står alt sammen.
So one of my colleagues actually sent that video to me a few months ago, and it was right around the time that my interest in just the topic of predictably building great software had just been reignited because of a few things that happened at work. This video really sort of catalyzed it for me, not this one, but the one we just watched, because it really drove home the point that user experience is so important. So I guess what I'm saying is my buddy Lawrence sent this video to me, so if this panel ends up sort of sucking, then you know who to blame. I'll give you his email address. So there's recently been a lot of buzz around this product that Microsoft's coming out with. It's called Surface. Most of you guys have probably seen it. If you haven't, then just go search for it online. Surface provides a multi-user, multi-touch tabletop display that allows interaction without using a mouse or a keyboard. The first time I actually saw the Surface table, I saw the video, I was really amazed, right? I was really inspired. And then I joined Microsoft a few months ago, and I've had the opportunity to actually play with the table physically a few times. And I tell you, man, if you're someone that cares about user experience and you have a keen interest in it, it's a real treat. These guys really nailed it. And that's why it gives me great pleasure to introduce my first panelist, Daniel McCoskey. He's the interaction design manager for Surface, and his team is specifically responsible for figuring out just the language of gestures and touch, right? So how do people interact with this device by using their hands and their fingers? No small feat. So thank you for joining us today, Daniel.
Thank you, Nishant.
So a few years ago, when the software industry at large was struggling with the notion of design and user experience, a company came along, Adaptive Path, that built a flourishing business around the notion of user experience. Today, Adaptive Path is one of the most influential and leading user experience consultancies in the world. And the kind of contributions that they've made to the space are immeasurable. If you guys are sort of wondering what's up on the screen, I recommend you hit up the URL right at the bottom. It's a case study I saw at UX Week, and they've blogged a lot about that. It really exemplifies the essence of UX. If you're having difficulty explaining it to people, this is a good place to go. So, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my second panelist, Dan Harrelson. He's a design technologist from Adaptive Path. And like many of the folks that I've met from Adaptive Path, he's sort of a Swiss Army knife of designing good software. So welcome, Daniel.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Dan.
Dan.
There's Daniel and Dan, so I'm going to screw it up a few more times. OK. So just a few months ago, I had the pleasure to share a room with a bunch of really smart people and Bill Gates, where Bill Gates actually said, I'm not kidding, it was 3 months into my job, and I quote, this is what Bill Gates said, "Every stupid thing we did first." Now, he was referring to Microsoft Office when he said that. Specifically, he was referring to the fact that while everyone was betting on everything but the GUI, Office bet on the GUI, and that's how we sort of got that market. Now, it's been a few years since we came out with Office, and a lot has happened since then. And it seems like Office has gone ahead and done something that's, again, seemingly stupid. They've gotten rid of their entire UI and their UX and swapped it out with something called a ribbon. Now, if I were a betting guy, which this is Vegas, so I am, I would put my money on the fact that history is going to repeat itself. The ribbon is Office's bet on UX, which I think is really pretty cool. So please welcome Jensen Harris. He's the group program manager of the Office UX team, and he's one of the pioneers and the original designers behind the ribbon. So thank you for joining us today,
Thanks for having
Jensen. Me. And this is the fun one. A few years ago, a little browser came out of nowhere, and I think it single-handedly reignited our passion for the internet. It was fast, it was clean, it embraced standards, and dare I say, it did have one of the coolest logos that I'd ever seen. Not to mention it was, and it still is, free. So the thing I loved about this browser was its plugin model. I was a front-end web developer. I've worn many hats in the past few years. But the plugin model is really what unlocked it for me, right? The web developer plugin, Firebug, those are things that if you guys have done any front-end web development, you would connect with. So yes, I am talking about Firefox, and this is a Microsoft conference. I can see some people going, huh? So last, but certainly not the least, I'm very excited that Mike Schrepfer is here. He's the VP of engineering for Mozilla. So in other words, he's sort of the lead engineer behind Firefox. So thank you for being here, Mike.
Thanks.
So my name is Nishant Kothari, and I'm a UX evangelist here at Microsoft. If you didn't figure it out already, I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. The topic of streamlining software design has always sort of fascinated me, and I think the fascination really grew after I had a brief stint with a very dysfunctional team and a very dysfunctional product. I think most of us have had those experiences. I'm not going to name names. The thing was, we had a very talented team, right? We had really good people. And it wasn't bad design or bad code that killed us. It was the soft stuff. It was the personality differences, the lack of accountability, the lack of investment in design, right? Unrealistic schedules, personnel ineptness. It's that kind of stuff. So it's not just talent, the raw talent that you need to build good software. Why I'm truly excited that these guys are here is because they all sort of represent a product or a service that kind of gets it, right? lucky for us today that they've actually decided that they're going to share some time with us to give us a candid peek into their methods, their processes, and their experiences. They basically agreed to help us answer the question we're all here to answer. What's the secret formula for developing software that looks good, feels good, and just works? That's the only part I prepared. At this point, we turn autopilot off, and we're going to go crazy. So really, my idea for the panel, when I was thinking about it this morning, was how can we really discuss this topic without being too high level, right? We all go to those kind of panels, and those are good for certain things. But I want you guys, I want all of us to sort of walk out with something tangible. And when I talked to these guys last week, we sort of discussed that on a call, right? And we said, hey, let's try and be real. Right? Let's forget that there's an audience here. If we were actually sitting in a room without you guys here, what would we talk about? So it's sort of the 4 themes that I thought about was, we obviously want to talk about a few topics that are all relevant to this topic. User experience obviously being at the top of the list for me. Then there are things like design and development methodologies, right? How do you engineer software? How do you execute? Then I want to talk about the soft stuff, right? What's that soft stuff around recruiting, around keeping people happy within your team? How do you create an environment where you can build good software? How do you channel communication? And hopefully all this will help us get some takeaways that we can walk away with. So a few ground rules before we get started. And these guys know this, but just to review, we're not marketing, we're not PR, so we're not going to be trying to sell anything up here.
Go Surface!
Where's my personal foul? And I think I don't need to set these guys up for ground rules, but no soapboxes, right? Get in what you have to say. Let's get into a heated debate about it. No punches, no hitting each other. So outside of that, we're sort of going to take this organically. I don't know if we're going to go all 50 minutes. I don't know if we're going to go how much time we're going to have for questions. I do request that we try to save the questions till the end, but if you think you have a really good question, raise your hand, come up to the mic, and we'll break the flow, and we'll get that into it. So, okay, are you guys ready? Want to do some stretches? And So I'm going to seed this a little bit, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. But the first thing that I really wanted to talk about and really think about was, how do you nurture design in an organization, right? And my assumption is, if you're planning to build good software, right, the first time around, you're going to have to be really user-focused. And that I'm assuming that, right? One of you may step up here and say, hey, you don't need to be a very design-centric organization. You could have the right processes, and that would work. But how do you actually create an environment that always cares? Every person cares about the user at every step of the way. The way we don't punt on performance bugs, how do we stop punting on user experience bugs? It's open to you guys. Anyone want to take it?
I'll take it. You hear a lot the kind of, you should have been there, answer to questions on, what did you hear when you were doing user research, when you were talking to the users, when you're finding out what their problems are. So often, people who are further down the line, people who are in engineering, hear from the user researchers, well, you just had to be there. You had to be sitting there at their desk, seeing what they went through. You had to be in their home, experiencing all the drama that their family brought and how that affected, their experience with the product. And getting rid of that, figuring out how you can get, engineers, how you can get, people who are in business, people who are in marketing into that space, get them into user research sessions. Take them on the field with you. That's something we do quite a bit at AP is we'll take a team of 3 or 4 researchers out to the field to talk to people and get their notions on what they're looking for in a product, but we'll take somebody else from the client as well. We'll take them along so that there's always at least one representative who can take that torch, back to the office and carry that all the way through and say, I heard that guy. That guy wanted this or that or the other.
So ideally, you might be saying, let's take Microsoft, since we can easily talk about. No, I'm actually going to bash it. So it's a huge place, right? Microsoft's a huge place. So how can we take something like that? I mean, are you saying that we basically can take one person from the marketing team, one person from PR, people who are accountable, and then have them become a very integral part of user experience?
Yes.
For me, it's about going beyond saying that within a product team that's made up of multiple disciplines, that one set of people are the ones who are responsible for user experience, and everyone else isn't. If you think about what it takes to build a house, there's an architect. Yes, there is. There's maybe a designer who's going to pick out the colors for the rooms. But in the end, unless the electrician cares about getting the fit and finish of every one of the plates straight and the screws in right, there's going to be a takeaway in terms of user experience. And that's the case in software as well, right? In the end, no matter how much sort of oversight the people who are responsible for user experience have, there's going to be an engineer sitting in his room writing code who's going to make a bad decision because he doesn't understand the big picture. He doesn't understand why design is important, and he doesn't understand what it even means to care about design. The two choices look equal. They pick A, where B was just as easy but would have a net better effect on design. So I think what you're saying is it's not just about telling them what to do, it's about them understanding, every member of the team, including engineering, including developers, including testers, understanding the big picture of design and caring about it. Yeah. They have to care about it.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good point. It's really easy to dismiss a piece of criticism if it's on a piece of paper or in a PRD, or your product manager said, well, people don't like it because of X. And you say, well, they didn't know what they're doing. What does it matter? It's a lot harder to do that when you're staring someone in the face and you're seeing how frustrated they're getting when they're trying to accomplish a task. Or when we have a wall in our office of handwritten letters from people who thanked us for the product and said, thank you for making me able to use my computer again, because I don't have spyware and pop-ups and all the rest of it, right? And so you have to realize that at the end of the day, there's another human being on the other side of that computer who's actually trying to use the product. And you have to get yourself into the mindset of how are they going to feel when they see this? And how important is it to them? Because it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters what they think, because they're the one using the product.
So I'm really interested in your perspective on this. How do you do that with an army of developers across the world, an army of people developing stuff across the world? How do you do that in open source?
It's
how do you plant that seed? That I'm totally with you guys. It's just how do you execute on that? Because that's the tough part. How do you convince your organization or people?
So I think unfortunately, there's no easy one answer. I think the techniques are rather similar in the sense that you have to let people see the impact of what they do, right? Whether they read about it in someone's blog, whether they meet the person, whether they see the handwritten letter. Sorry, I don't know if that was me, but
that was me.
I guess you don't agree, but no,
sabotaging each other.
So, and I think that the other point I was going to make besides humanizing it is, how do you get an organization to do anything? Well, you have to prove that it's important to you, right? It's easy to say we care about design, or we care about performance, or we care about the customer. But how do you make a decision when it costs you, right? When do you decide to delay a product because you've got to fix a usability issue, right? And that's when you prove that you care about it, right? Because you say, we're going to stop everything, we're going to fix this issue because usability, because fit and finish, because that pixel being one off in this icon is really going to bug people in a way that they probably can't express. They're just going to say, no, it just doesn't feel good, right? And those, you can't compromise on those things. So I think with any of these things, you have to prove in action that the organization is willing to take penalties, basically, in order to make sure that they build a product that people love.
Yeah, two really concrete things we did, because we have developers on 4 continents as well working on Microsoft Office. One is every week throughout the product cycle of Office 2007, we sent out videos to every person who is related to the user interface of little minute snippets of either a user in the usability lab doing a test, of some person telling their story of something that they got frustrated with, so that people could make the human connection. You have to see a face. The second thing that we did, and what you said totally resonated with me, is early in the product cycle, like in beta 1, we were fighting for 1 pixel off bugs. Not because it mattered that that pixel was off in beta 1, but because that showed everyone that we cared. Like, I was going to go fight for something that seemed unreasonable to everyone, because that got them thinking, like, wow, we really care about 1 pixel off? So that when we got to RTM, we weren't having those fights. Everyone's like, well, obviously, as an org, we care about 1 pixel off bugs and 10 pixel off bugs and all the rest of fit and finish.
So does that sort of have a ripple effect? Like, what I'm seeing here is that someone took the lead on your team, which would be you or your team, and said, hey, this may seem unreasonable to the rest of the world to fight for that pixel, because I've been in war team meetings where you can't say, oh, we've got to move that button that's a P1, right? I mean, you'll have 4 developers lunge at you, and the dev manager will, Chuck Norris roundhouse kick you.
That doesn't happen too often to me, actually. But
I've worked at very different places than you have. But does that sort of does that start building that culture then?
absolutely.
Slowly?
Yeah, I mean, now we've had our team together for almost 4 years, and the developers, there's a whole class of things they know when they're sitting in their office how to fix them now. Like, they don't make the mistake the first time because they know the things our organization believes in. We care about these certain qualities of user experience. 1 pixel off. We care about accessibility. We care about performance. And there's certain things that they just get right that never have to come to the war room or the triage at the end of the process.
That's interesting.
It's a constant re-education, of course, because you're always getting new people on the team, and you have to continue to fight those things. But it's the unreasonability of that initial fight that sticks with people. That emotional thing is the thing that sticks with them when they're sitting in their office alone writing code.
So let me actually shift modes for a second. Because all this, it sort of alludes to selling, right? You're internally selling something. You're selling a concept. How do you guys, I mean, do you have some tricks up your sleeve that you use to sell to upper management to, and to sell to people who go, I just want to ship the darn thing, right? And saying, you know what, we should slip it. And I'm not talking about, really convincing them with data. I think that's great, but I've seen data not work too. Is there an art to selling this stuff? I don't know if you guys know Dan Rome. So is Dan in the audience? No. Dan's doing a session here, and he's written a book called The Back of the Paper Napkin, right? And it was fascinating because I interviewed him yesterday. He basically, he doodles, right? He takes ideas, very complex ideas, like business plans, and draws stick figures that really convey those ideas. So to me, that's one tactic to really make that emotional connection so you can sell your idea. What do you guys use on your teams? Like, we want tricks.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, I think working in a really low fidelity sketch format for a very long time is one of the things that I would say is, essential to any design process, any creation process. As soon as you get to higher fidelity mediums like code, like even, Photoshop, comps, etc., you're now in a medium where it's a lot more expensive and costly to make adjustments and changes. And the beautiful thing about sketching is, as horrible as some of our stick figures may be, everyone can take a pen and everyone can start expressing themselves visually, even our users. So on Surface, we've been exploring this notion of what we call participatory design. How can we get everyday people giving us concepts and ideas about what would really work well with gesture? I mean, gesture is a fairly new interaction medium. There aren't a whole lot of standards out there. And so finding a way, a medium that not only all the disciplines on your team, but people outside your team have a way to influence that is really important.
Are you bringing engineers in?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're selling that inside of Microsoft as well. You're bringing in the users, but you're also taking Microsoft employees and saying, hey, you may not normally work with pen and paper, but today you are, and you're going to kind of go through this process with us?
Yeah, I'm getting the sense that all of you agree that one integral part of this design culture is internal evangelism in education, right? Yeah. Helping people internally on a daily basis, getting them into the habit of thinking about it. And maybe that is the simple answer, right?
Well, there's also the aspect of positive reinforcement. So I think about, so we changed the UI font for Office 2007. For years, our UI font was called Tahoma, and we changed it to a new font called Sego UI. And that was really important to us because we thought it made the look of the product cleaner and opener and stuff like that. But it was a 6-week dev cost. That's how much engineering that it took to make that shift. And our developers literally couldn't see the differences between the fonts. They would look at them like, why are we wasting our time on this? The G is the same as this G. It looks the same. I honestly can't even see a difference. And we had a big, unreasonable fight about it, and we finally got them to agree to do it, much to their chagrin, right? They were just like, I can't believe we're wasting time on this. No one's going to be able to tell the difference. Well, positive reinforcement. Someone can tell a difference, actually. And when you finally find the people who are like, wow, this new font is great, they're writing you mails, reviewers are talking about it, you have to deliver that feedback back to you have to close the cycle.
Yeah, to close
deliver
the
that feedback back.
Yeah. Because that often happens a lot, right? You're running hard for ship, and then you don't do the postmortem, and you don't close the loop.
But it's the thing that gives you credibility so that later when you're making the next unreasonable request, they're like, these guys know what you're talking about, and we'll go with them.
So tell me something. When do you guys start thinking about the next version? So Firefox, right, for instance, are you planning the next version in tandem? I'm just very curious about Firefox in general, right? How do you actually do that design planning? It's sort of what the UX does, how the UX is going to innovate.
Yeah, it's hard to answer in a real short period of time, but we do a lot of parallel development. So Firefox 3, which is just about to ship, was in development 2.5 years ago when we were still working on 1.5 and 2.0, and we've been working on Firefox 4. So we do parallel development in major releases, and then there are often multiple initiatives going on that are technology initiatives or usability initiatives that aren't necessarily even targeted at a particular release. It's just this is an area where we need to innovate, and we don't know when it's going to pay off. And I think part of that is helpful because it is a distributed community. So we're not, it's not a command and control organization. We don't sit in and give orders to everyone, on every Monday on what they're going to do. It's really more of a bottom-up distributed, let's get a bunch of really smart people together and let's get them interested in what they're interested in doing and then aggregate that work into a meaningful product. And so a lot of the things that we come up with, we never even thought of. That someone comes out of the blue and built an extension or shows up one day and says, hey, I had this really great idea. Let's try it out. And I would say that that's the other part that I think is integral to Firefox's usability development is iteration and testing. So we do builds every morning, and there are about 50,000 people worldwide who run those builds, called our nightly builds, right? So this is a great platform for us to try stuff out. Let's try a new UI element, and let's not even tell people what we're going to do it. Let's just change it and see what happens.
And you throw it out in the world.
Throw it out in the world,
and they
and
test it for you.
You get feedback. The next morning, there are bugs filed. What the heck happened to my home button? Or where did sometimes it's actually the smallest things which evoke the biggest feedback. So in Firefox 2, the close button for the tab used to be on the far right. And we moved it to the tab, which is actually very similar to what many other applications do. And so everyone thought this was pretty obvious. And I can show you the bug with the comments. It was split 50-50, where people were really upset that we made this move, and other people were really happy.
I'll break the tie. I'll say I like it.
Most people, after a while, decided they liked it, and there's a way to get it back if you really want to. But it's not always a clear judgment call. But rapid iteration and trying to try things out, get feedback. I think you have to admit, as a designer, that you don't always know. Just like when you write code, you don't always know whether it's going to be right. Like you are often wrong. And you may be wrong in a good way or wrong in a bad way. And so you need to try it out and see what the feedback is. And then the other, I think, mistake people really make is they don't give people things enough time. Most things, especially daring things, when you're trying to change fundamental concepts that people are used to, you have to give it enough time. If you give it an hour and someone tries it out, I don't like it, it's different. And they throw it away. Well, it may be a fantastic idea. It just takes a little bit of time to get used to. So you got to bake it long enough and make sure you're paying attention to it.
One of the things that you said that really resonated with me, like actually everything that you said sounds very similar to what we face in Office as well, and the importance of daily builds and all that. But if you're going to make those small changes and throw them out, the other thing that we found is always make the most inflammatory change. Which is to say, if there's two things and one is, you could go this far, and the other one is go this far, and you think this one's better, throw that one out there. Because if you go this far and then you get the little bit of feedback that's like, well, this one is sort of okay, you'll never know whether this one could have worked or not.
That's how I bargain, too, in markets.
Early in the product cycle, be willing to make that big choice, and then you can always roll it back to here if you want to, which sometimes you do and sometimes you stick with it.
Yeah. So, all four of you probably have a very interesting perspective on design process, right? So in the moment you say design process, I usually get the typical answer, oh, you do wireframes, you do prototypes, you build some more prototypes, and then you do some more wireframes, some iteration. It's usually a mishmash of that stuff, right? So let's forget about that high-level stuff. What tactically, right? Let's say Office, for instance, or Surface, or Firefox. So any of you guys can jump in. Like, you're building version X. How do you get there? It's 3 years, it's 2 years, maybe it's a 1 month cycle. Let's talk about the big one, right? How do you get there? Like, what are the phases?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the mistakes is that the sort of ideation, like the actually creating of new ideas, is the thing that takes the longest amount of time. And while that does take some amount of time, the execution of it is actually much more important. Which is to say that a place where most organizations fail, I think, or at least products that I've worked on, is not in coming up with a really great idea. It's taking the really great idea and actually getting it shipped, as opposed to just having it watered down as you go or losing focus as you go. I And so while you guys, I'm sure will have a lot of great perspectives on the wireframe versus and you know, all that stuff, and I do as well, but I'll let you guys answer that part of it. I think a really important piece is to get the engineering of it right, which is to say the last 2/3 of our product cycle in Office 2007 was taking the sketches that we had in October of 2003 of pretty much looked like what the product ended up shipping like, and getting that actually built and shipped in October of 2006. That's 2.5 years of execution to get that idea done. And so really, it's not just about the ideation, it's about execution.
So that's interesting, because what typically happens, or what I've seen usually happen, I don't know what kind of experiences you've had, is you come up with that idea, right? You say, okay, this is what we're all going to charge towards, and then, like you said, it dilutes. How do you keep that? I mean, obviously you guys had a lot of faith in the sketches and the stuff that you did 2 years prior, right? Because that's what you went back to.
I'll talk about this some in my talk on Friday morning, but a little marketing. But design tenets were really important for us, which is that the first thing we did was come up with a set of 5 design tenets, which was sort of the religion of our team. And so anytime we didn't know which decision to make and we were conflicted about it, we used the design tenets to help us make a consistent decision. Sometimes you can get so caught up in the details of like, oh, on this side, there's this 7 pros, and on this side, there's these 7 pros. I can't decide. If you have a really strong religion, a design tenet that you believe in, then most of those decisions it's easy to make consistently, because you just go back to the sort of founding document of your team, which is we believe in this. If we believe in this, then this is the decision we make, and you go with it.
Who came up with that? Who comes up with that?
Everybody should come up with
Yeah.
But because if they don't believe it, and they won't carry it forward. You know, you need to have those design tenets, design principles, you know, so ingrained in everybody participating, because there's going to be the point, you know, you made the example of the engineer who at 3 a.m. is writing code, and he comes across, you know, a point where he has to make a decision. He has to decide, what am I going to do now? And I don't have Jensen, you know, looking over my shoulder. I can't call him up. I have to make a call right here and now. If I've got those design principles ingrained in my head, I can make the right decision. You know, that... You know, you talked about, you know, how do you get it right? Well, that's you want to make lots and lots of right decisions. You know, because all of those get you to the end of having a right product. You know, and everyone needs to be thinking along those same lines and have those ideas really baked in.
Right. I think the thing I struggle with, and I don't think there's an answer to this, is what all of you guys are saying. I mean, you're taking one thing for granted, is that there's passion across the board, right? That everyone has the passion. I don't think you can create passion. So, and that's where I think that's when the soft stuff starts really mattering, and you start really slipping in different ways.
Well, it's one of the things that we see a lot. I mean, we're unlike the rest of these guys. We're consultants, and so we jump from project to project to project. We jump from client to client to client, and you know, we're not working with one culture all the time. We're working with lots of different cultures, and so we have to adjust to what the given culture is. You know, we've worked with companies who are, you know, large, ingrained financial companies that have been around for 100 years, and you have to find out, how do you give them the passion? You know, maybe it's things as mundane as using their PowerPoint template when you're presenting big ideas to the right people. Because if you come in and use your consultant adaptive path template, it doesn't get across. I mean, I know that sounds dumb, but that sort of thing makes sense. I mean, you were at UX Week last year, where we had CNN up on stage talking about the case study of their relaunch.
Yep.
And one of the slides was these T-shirts that we gave out to everybody at CNN that says, "I am not the target user." You know, because they had that mindset. They had the mindset of, I'm sitting here in a cubicle inside of CNN, and I'm just like everybody else out there watching my television program. No, you're not. You have all kinds of different people out there, and you had done all this work to create these personas around who your users are. And so artifacts like a T-shirt, you know, artifacts like posters, you know, hanging up in walls that help to reinforce these ideas. I'm sure Microsoft has that all over the place, you know, posters, you know, throughout their buildings around, you know, here's some great new initiative we're doing to get everybody fired up around whatever you're working on.
Totally.
Well, it's sort of the brutal reality, at least that we saw in Office, making a change where not everyone started out on board, is sometimes you have to remove the people who aren't on board. Just to say the whole team can't buy in unless you take the agitators and find other projects for them. I'm not saying those people got fired, but we found other projects for them to work on. Like everyone who didn't believe in our design tenets, who couldn't come on board, who just said, I don't believe in this change, that took away from the single-mindedness of the team. And so we found ways to use their skills to do other things to help Microsoft. And once we had the core set of people who believed in it, then you do have that single-mindedness of purpose. So sometimes T-shirts work, and that is effective. Yeah. Occasionally they don't, and you should be willing, as a leader of a design organization, to take action, to sometimes to help people find other opportunities when that's appropriate.
Yeah, I like that, and it's tough to find leadership that does that, right? And I think I like all the ideas you guys have, but like I think at times I'm always thinking about this in a way that's impossible to solve. It's like, what if you don't have that? What if you don't have that? What if you don't? I think you get eventually to like a null pointer, and it's the end of the day. So let's completely shift topics for a second, and let's talk about development processes. I think this part should be really interesting. Is there a utopia? Because lately it's all been about agile programming, and everyone's doing 6-week scrums or 6-week sprints and stuff. I've been on both sides of the fence. I've seen some real ugliness. What do you guys think? Do you guys have opinions about the development process? How do you guys do it?
I'm not really qualified to talk about development because I'm managing the interaction design team. But I will say that Surface is working within sort of an agile framework. We go through these sprints. We have 6 weeks where we define what we want to create, and this is all based again on our tenets, our overall direction that we're heading on. And I think it may be different for Surface because it's a very experience-oriented product anyway, that we've made a clear decision to prioritize the quality of the experience over just number of features, right? It doesn't matter if you can't do red eye reduction in photos just yet. Let's make sure that we're getting it right so that all the physics model and all the gestures work really well. So we are using Agile. To be quite honest, it's very painful as a designer to be within that because I never feel like I have enough time. It feels like, from a design perspective, it's really valuable to have a process where you envision the whole arc, where you can have some time to look at concepts that integrate the entire experience, right? Where you're not just doing that on a very small scale. So, I don't know. For me, the jury's still out. I like the idea of, just I was talking about earlier, of prototyping and sketching and how that needs to be really fluid. I really like that counterpart on the development side of getting stuff out really quickly. But for me, the problem is how do you find a way to ensure that there's a vision and a holistic experience?
What's your methodology, Mike?
The way I was going to answer your question was I think the biggest mistake people make is that they pick an ideal process and they apply it to their situation, whether it applies or not. Yeah. Like everything in life, it really depends on the situation. I don't think people building onboard flight control systems for an airliner, right, are going to necessarily use the same development process as a startup trying to get funding, trying to build a website in 2 weeks. Right? You have an entirely different set of constraints in terms of life and death, speed, iteration, that sort of thing. So I think the first thing to remember is there's no magic rule book that if you just do it this way, no matter what you're working on, everything will be wonderful. Right? That's the first thing that everyone's it easily messes up. So I think it really depends on the situation. It depends on how big the project is, how long the development cycle is, how established it is, what your tolerance for risk is. Right?
Skill sets, how big your team,
how geographically distributed. Like, are you trying to be aggressive and innovative? Are you trying to maintain quality? Like, you have this quadrant of constraints you're trying to find the best path through. And there's not, even within the same project and the same team, you might want to apply very different methodologies to different things. You might want to do a very quick date-driven release here for a specific reason. You might want to do a more open-ended, big technology push that takes as long as it takes over here.
I think it was in Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, where he said it isn't good designers make good designs, not good processes. Or I think that was the general consensus in there. So I get that, but it's rough because the reality is, you guys all work on products that sort of get it, right? In reality, most products don't, right? They don't have. Everyone's not passionate. Everyone's not on the same bar. People aren't empowered to make all the decisions. There are all sorts of issues. I beg your pardon?
They're using waterfall. They're not using a nice agile process.
Yeah.
Well, so I can defend waterfall. I defend it, but we built Office 2007 using something similar to a waterfall process. One of the important things, though, that we did from the very beginning is we realized there'd be a whole bunch of things we'd get wrong, and not just once, but twice. And so we built iteration into the schedule of the product, meaning late post-beta time to recode things. We built it into our architecture. Like, we told the devs from the beginning, this is going to be unlike anything you've ever worked on before, in that we're going to change a bunch of stuff late in the product cycle as we get feedback and as we see the results of longitudinal usability studies. And so they designed an architecture that allowed us to be, quote, agile, which is to say we put some more work in up front to know that later on we were going to make changes to this code and that code and that code, and that was going to be okay. And so, I don't know how agile would work across, a team like Office that has a couple thousand people working on it. But you can find elements of agile or elements of Scrum and apply it to a smaller team within a larger team, if that makes sense. And I think for a UI team, iteration has to be key. Like, you just can't do it without iteration, without learning what you foul up and fixing it. Yeah. And either you can ship those mistakes and fix them in version 3, which is what Microsoft had the reputation of doing for a lot of years, or you can plan to get to version 3 and version 1, and that means putting the iteration into the product cycle.
So I'm going to throw a grenade out here because I've been on both sides. I'm kind of with you. Like, the jury's out for me. My frustration with Agile was it was very easy for everyone on the team to actually use that Agile to their advantage as a stick, right? It was very easy for people to discard, put that on the product backlog, right? And of course, the process was completely being manipulated at that point. But I was irate that it was so easy to manipulate the process. I didn't have that similar experience in Waterfall, because in Waterfall we knew, we're in ideation phase right now, right? We're gonna finish the whole design and stuff. Do you guys have any thoughts around that? Is that something that you sort of encounter?
To me, it ties into. So Jensen, did you say earlier that you think it takes longer to do ideation than it does to do development?
No.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
I said I think one of the mistakes people make is assuming that ideation is the part where the product gets designed and the rest of it sort of doesn't matter.
Okay.
When in fact it's a sort of a small part of the overall product cycle.
Right. Okay. So I think the design team can clearly envision more than can be realistically built within timeframes that the team has, right? So, and I think that that's been the one way that our design team has been able to make sure that we're doing the right things when it does come time to do one of these sprints, one of these cycles, that we've actually envisioned, beyond. We're not just immediately looking at, all right, what's being developed in the next iteration? Let's really, do only the specs for that. We look beyond that as well. So that's one way that we ensure that things don't get punted. Well, I can't do that now. Well, when will you do that? Because that's dependent on this. And we have a bit of that view.
So it's like agile waterfall?
A little bit. I mean, it's just the physical laws, I think, of ideas come more freely than the ability that we have to create them. And so what you need to do is document and design and capture. And that's something that we're struggling with. How do you ensure that because really all the documentation gets focused on, here's what you want to build. We don't want to have the development team looking at, okay, you build this part, but this element may come next month, and this part's for next year. So all that tends to get discarded, and we haven't solved it yet, but our plan is to make sure that we have a good repository of things that are on the roadmap, have been thought about, but we're not yet ready to commit to.
I think that ties back totally to what Mike was saying, and I think that really resonates well with me. I know I'm sort of hung up on the process and the terminology, but I think it's important for people to just understand that there is no one process to do it, right? And you have to be very cognizant of that. You cannot say that, hey, we're going to do sprints and scrums. We're going to use Scrum for our product. And 2 months down the line, when it's really not working for you, you still stick to that. And 2 months after that, you still stick to that. I don't think there's a secret formula there. Now, so I have another interesting question, and maybe you can start off with this one, Mike. Who drives the process, so to speak, for you guys? How do you guys communicate that process? I know you do daily builds and stuff, but it seems very amorphous to me.
Yeah, so I think the thing to keep in mind is it's a combination of dichotomies because it is a fundamentally distributed open process where participation is not only allowed but encouraged from anyone on the planet, right? Anyone on the planet can comment. It's an open bug tracking system. You can just submit your email and then now you have a login. Now you have the ability to comment on a specific design feature of the current or next version of Firefox or anything else Mozilla builds, right? So that's the fundamental thing is kind of grassroots participation. But that doesn't mean that everyone gets to make every decision. Right? So at the end of the day, it's what we call a meritocracy, which is the people who have proven a track record of making good technical and good design decisions are the ones who get the ultimate authority on how to make a call. And this was, I think the best thing to illustrate is the design shift that happened. Does anyone here ever use the Mozilla Suite, the thing that predated Firefox? It was mail and browser combined into one application. And then Firefox and Thunderbird emerged out of that. And I think what's more important than the difference in the applications was the difference in design philosophy. So in the Mozilla Suite days, each area owner could design their part of the UI. So if I was working on networking, I could design the networking preferences panel, right? And if someone else was working on cookies, they could design that. We could add as many buttons and options as we wanted. When the model shifted to Firefox, it was actually more of a centralized model in terms of design control, in the sense that there was a smaller group of people who was trying to enforce a theme and a belief and a set of principles and tenets throughout the entire product, right? So you didn't have one huge panel here and a tiny panel here, right? And tried to lay out some of those basic tenets and make it as small and easy and slimmed down as possible, only the options that matter, all of the things that result in a good product. And so that still carries over today, and that there is a small set of people who, by their actual work and contribution to the project, have gained now the authority to make those calls when the data is unclear, as it almost always is, right? In terms of, do we do this or do we do that? And I can construct an argument either way depending on which I want to push, but at some point someone's got to make a call.
So it's kind of like a cabal. Like how do you become that person who has that stature, or does that just sort of emerge?
It's kind of, the way I like to describe it, it's more like an organic or biological system than it is an artificial creation, right? So the people emerge out of it because they start participating, right? And the amazing thing about Mozilla is, one of our main developers used to be a church organist. Another one used to bake donuts, right? They have entirely different backgrounds, but they had the actual raw capability. They just didn't go to an Ivy League school. That option wasn't there. But they started participating, and they started commenting, and they maybe started QAing, and then they started writing code, and then they started doing stuff. And just this pattern emerged that, wow, this person is doing lots of really good work. And all of their peers who are experts in that area recognize this and say, that person making good decisions. Let's have them make more decisions, right?
Passion plus track record.
Passion plus track record, right? The people who know how to do it ought to do the job. So there's no politics, there's no favorite picking. It's really just, do you have the track record? Have you done the work? Do you have the credibility to have the keys to make these kind of decisions? And that's true on the technical level in code, and it's true in the design level in terms of making decisions about the user experience. It's true in policy and a whole bunch of other things. And I think building an organization that has core principles and what they have a core belief in what they're building, passion, and then a system that rewards the people that do the good work, right, is really the key components. It's probably not enough, but it's the key components to building great products.
I think organic and biological is a great way to put it. So you said something that made me think of something. So does that mean that Microsoft, which we have hierarchies, right? Everyone has a role, and you don't want to step on people's toes and stuff like that. Are we stunted in that sense then, because we have a hierarchy that's really putting us in a box?
One of the culture things that we had to change on the Office UI team, the Office UI team has existed a long time. I've only been there since the beginning of Office 2007, so I came over to work on the Office 2007 product. One of the culture issues we had on the team was people got rewarded or thought they got rewarded for coming up with ideas, which led to this culture where people protected their ideas, where they closed their doors, where they thought their job was to get as many of their ideas through, and whoever got the most ideas done got the next promotion and the next big reward. And we had to change the culture to say that the thing you get rewarded for is finding the best idea and executing on it, which means that you're responsible for some element of the user experience, and you go seek the person who's had the great idea or the person who knows how to solve a problem, and you're responsible for actually doing the execution of that. And so that, for us, has helped us transcend hierarchy a little bit because there isn't as much politics in the reward system, which is sort of what you talked about, which isn't exactly the same in the open source world, but it is in the commercial software world. In the end, there's a performance review. And in the end, there's someone that does well and someone that doesn't do well. How can you tie that to product performance in a real UI sense?
Yeah.
And we had to transcend that and change the culture of our team to make it good to work together.
I know actually that exists, so I'm going to correct myself when I said that, are we stunted as Microsoft? The thing about Microsoft that's really tough, and I know I said no marketing and there's not marketing, I think it's just, it's interesting that we've been talking about, Mozilla and adaptive fat and stuff. So the interesting piece about Microsoft is, I joined a few months ago, and the thing you quickly realize is you can't generalize in that company. It's too huge to generalize. There are all these silos. So one of the teams I work with is Expression Web, right? Expression Web is building a standards-based web design tool. And they run kind of like you guys do, it seems, because the guy who really owns the release, the version 2 release, Tyler Simpson, his title is test manager, right? Nobody really cares. Nobody cares about the title. Everyone's sort of empowered. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is that seems to create a much better culture where, yeah, we're sort of boxed into a team, but we're not boxed into a certain role. The only thing we're boxed into is you need to execute and succeed at an idea. So, Dan, tell me, you work with a lot of companies, and so you should be able to contrast what's the stuff what companies, and you don't have to name the companies or anything, but what's the stuff that really works well at some of the places? Can you contrast like the really good to the bad? On execution, like the way they've structured their organization and how that impacts execution.
Oh, man.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
Think about it.
No one's doing it well yet.
It's hard. I mean,
Sweet, I got a question in that he couldn't answer.
I think unfortunately, I mean, we have a couple, Mozilla and Microsoft, a couple pretty, pretty good companies out there that are doing a lot of stuff right, and then you particularly pick a couple of people from Microsoft that are working on stuff very right. You didn't bring up the guy who made Clippy or whatever,
Yeah.
So
you had to get that in, didn't you?
Right. And adaptive path doesn't work with perfect companies, so it's a little bit. So it's a little harder. One of the things I can say, though, I wanted to go back to the whole idea on ideation, is again in companies like Mozilla or like Microsoft who kind of get it. You're right. You probably go too much in the other way. We see a lot of companies that are on the complete other side. That they don't get enough ideas out. That somebody up on high comes with a good idea, and that's what you build for the next 12 months. You haven't gone through the process of coming up with at least 2 good ideas. To be able to look at the pros and cons of the two, hopefully 5, 6, 7, 8 good ideas. Have those ideas come from all different parts of the organization, and have people, stand up on a soapbox and defend them and say, here's why we should be doing this product or this product in this way or this feature, or here's this new market that we should go after, that sort of thing. We see the opposite. I mean, we see that more often than not, that we really need to pull out of our clients more and more ideas, and they really have a hard time. I mean, a lot of companies are not set up to have that sort of open, free flowing of information. It's that somebody on high is going to tell me what to do, and that's what I'm going to do.
The old culture.
It seems like it must be really hard to motivate the team to be passionate about user experience.
Yes.
If you just have Michael Scott from corporate America telling you, hey, this is what you're doing.
Yeah. It's also at the same time, yeah, it is. It's absolutely very hard if somebody's doing top down. It's also really hard if the bottom up doesn't get support from the top. That's the other thing we see is sometimes we're working with a UX group inside of a company and they get it. Like they are fighting so hard for the user, trying to make a good customer experience, and somebody in management, maybe 2 or 3 levels above them, is blocking them, is stopping them. They don't get it, and so they're bringing somebody like us in to help champion that cause. To sometimes that's the reality. Is you bring the consultant in to say, look, the consultant says the same thing we do, and now suddenly CEO listens to it or something of that sort. And that's tough. It's tough to convince upwards as well.
Yeah. Lost my train of thought. I had a question for you. So you guys are building not just software, right? You have hardware that goes along with it. How the heck do you have a hardware team? How do all of you collaborate, and what's your sort of design and development process? How's the org structured?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges with having integrated hardware and software, and as many of you know, Microsoft is not known for our hardware, although you've seen more examples of that, whether it's Xbox over the past few years, Zune. We have a hardware team that does all peripherals and all that. But in general, it's an area that, that Microsoft is not our forte. So what we've done is just brought together some of the best experts at Microsoft to help us with that. The challenge from a software perspective is that you need really long lead times to do hardware. Yeah. Manufacturability and tooling and all of the pieces and parts that go about making something that you can make in volume for decent price points takes a long time. And that means you have to make decisions around the form factor, around all different types of things really early on. So one example of how we've tried to mitigate that is said, well, you know what, let's think about a lighting experience. Let's just build the capability that we have these LED lights in certain areas that the software team can access in the future for some potential reason. We're not even sure exactly what we're going to use it for. Should we use it for like warning, error, or we can use it for positive reinforcement? That's stuff that we're able to explore now. So, but we've tried to do that. I mean, honestly, it's just really tough and messy. And now we have one team that's, has to look at future scenarios, and we're just not always in sync.
You actually remind me of a funny anecdote I have. So I used to work at Amazon, and I actually worked on Kindle, which I don't know if you guys know, it's the reading device that Amazon came out with. So, my entire team, and we had a pretty small team, we had Kindles, right? So, we had test Kindles throughout the process for a year. Every time, and this really drove it home for me, right? I used to whine and cry about building websites, and you can build websites and fix them in the middle of the night. Here's what happens when hardware breaks. Like, literally, they used to fly a dude from San Francisco every time they found a real hardware bug, and he used to come with his bag of chips, and we would have to get on the schedule to get the bug fixed, which meant he would open it up and solder a couple of chips and close the bag and then fly back to San Francisco. And this is all this guy did, right? He was that engineer. So building hardware is, I think people don't realize it is such an art form to do that in tandem with software. And you're totally right. I don't think I can vocalize the kind of process we use because it was extremely organic, and the only way we did it was Mike was talking about, was everyone was empowered, right? We didn't own a piece, we owned the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to push back on this thread of, everyone owns the experience. And
awesome.
I just personally working at a company where there's one designer for every 48 engineers, and in a culture that has been technology dominant in the past, but I think is changing as Microsoft's becoming more design experience oriented. I do feel it's important for design professionals to stand up and to really make sure that they're helping to facilitate participation and inclusion where appropriate, but also to use their expertise. If I need to do heart surgery, I'm not just going to say, hey man, can you kind of test out a little bit? I mean, folks go through training to learn how to do that well. And I feel like, design and user research professionals need to be really valued for what.
Okay,
the thing I would push back on that, though, and I agree with that, but the extreme of that, the sort of ultimate hero culture, which is like, okay, I'm the Office UI guy. Every decision made by every single person across Office has to go through me or through you. It just doesn't scale. Like, in the end, unless you can empower people to make a modicum of reasonable decisions when they're sitting by themselves, it just can't scale. And so we talk about, there is a sort of hero. There has to be someone that is the hero, but the hero is sort of the team. And yes, there's someone at the top of the team, and someone has to get final cut. In the end, it's like a movie. Someone has to say, when there's two ways to go, you go this way. But it can't just be that. It can't just be one person, because it doesn't scale.
Yeah, I think we may be the extreme of that, because I haven't even met many people that work on our project. Right? For some of them, I don't even know where they live. Right? So, but they work together and they build the product. So it's much more effective for us to invest time in getting shared understanding of the principles and the tenets and the passion of what we're trying to build. So in other words, it's like building quality in the beginning rather than testing it out the back. Because we can always reject the change and say, nope, we don't agree, so we're not going to take it. But that's a lot more expensive than helping them understand which change we would accept in the very beginning part of the process.
This is, I think you guys do a great job of this. Like, and we talked about this in Office too, make it not be designed by one person, but feel as if it was designed by one person. You know, Firefox is an app that feels like it was designed by one person. But it's an app that's designed by thousands of people in all different countries.
So on that note, who does the UI? Like I'm talking actually about the pixels, right? Who actually creates the slices and stuff that builds the UI?
So I'll give you a specific example, which is we're redoing the visual. So besides design, I think the visual side is actually one of the most controversial, right? So I'm talking like icons and colors, right, and fonts, because that is something that everyone feels like they can comment on. And so we're completely redoing the design for Firefox 3 on 3 platforms, on Mac, Windows, and Linux, right?
Okay.
And so we actually have 3 different teams. We have a commercial team doing it for Windows, and we have 2 community teams doing it for Mac and Linux, right? And many of them are volunteers, right? They didn't like, in the Linux case, they didn't like where we're going, so a bunch of new people stepped up and said, well, we can do this. And they started putting together icons. And to be frank, our Linux work is further ahead of our Windows work right now,
then you have
which is being done by a commercial team externally. But it's tied together through these module owners, these people who I've described, who've risen through the meritocracy, who are responsible for the product and for the user experience. So they're ultimately going to cut or not cut the feature if it's good enough. But in this particular case, both the Mac and the Linux teams have gone way beyond our expectations. If we did it ourselves, it wouldn't have come out nearly as good. And so that's an example of them, because they were passionate and they were empowered and they understood the framework under which they were working. And so they did some stunning work.
So I'm confused. Are all 3 teams running in their own 3 directions, or
we have 3.
When someone builds an icon, say for the stop button, right? How do you apply it across all platforms?
So we have 3 different look and feels, one for each platform.
Really?
And we tried to tie. So we've done. I think we've done something different now, which is we try to tie some geometric aspects of it. So we have a thing called the keyhole, where the back button is bigger than the forward button, and a couple of other aspects that are shared across the platform, so you get the similar feel across them. But the Mac version looks like a Mac app. It looks like iTunes, actually. It looks like it's got a very different got a very different look and feel than the Windows version, which has a very different look and feel than Linux. So the philosophy here, which is a little bit different than our previous philosophy, was to blend into each platform, but to carry over characteristics so that if I swapped from platforms, I wouldn't feel like a totally swapped application. So I've gone. So each team is trying to be consistent with their own, plus consistent within the overall look and feel. And so we've had 1 or 2 people who try to get the basic architecture. And all of this is public. There's a couple of blogs I can point you to that takes you actually through the thought process and goes through wireframes and sketches of the keyhole and a bunch of other concepts. And tries to tie it all together. And then that's what the community, like I said, we didn't meet some of these folks. They read those blog posts. And they helped to execute based on that shared understanding.
To a guy that's come from a very different culture, that almost scares the crap out of me, right? Because you've almost exponentially added risk, because you're now building 3 products to some degree. But
Firefox has an architecture that makes that not risky. When I talked about building an architecture like we did in Office to make it possible to iterate, Firefox has a way that's not risky. And they have an architecture that makes it possible to plug in. They have a themes architecture that makes it so you can plug in Mac bitmaps, and that looks like map. And we have a similar thing in Office. And so that's why you build that dev architecture, to make it possible to make those changes in a way that's not risky. Because in the end, it's an engineering progress, and you do have to think about risk.
So good design is, a dependency for good design, I guess, is a good architecture for the software itself. And I mean, that might seem extremely obvious, but I work with really smart people who don't get that. So I actually want to come back to what Daniel said earlier. And it kind of like, I read your blog, Jensen, right? And you write about some pretty technical UX concepts, right? Who makes those kind of decisions? I'm sort of between you guys, where I love the idea of empowering everybody, but at the same time, I've seen that cause so much thrash that it's ridiculous. And maybe that's just because the organization didn't have a strong leader to sort of herd the cats. But there is a technical aspect to good user experience, right? A technical aspect of good design. And I mean, you obviously are nodding to that. Daniel, you brought this up. How do we empower those people and plug them in such that everyone's empowered, but I feel like they're the people who can scientifically tell you some things that the others can't.
Yeah. Well, you have to get the most out of those people, right? Like we have interaction design specialists, we have visual design specialists, we have researchers, we have anthropologists, we have all sorts of people who work on Office that help and bring their expertise to bear on the project. In the end, I don't think you're going to be successful unless you have a high-performance, high-functioning team. No matter how smart the person is who's the architect or the director of the movie, they're just not going to be effective at bossing everyone around and telling them what to do if the people aren't motivated to follow. I believe you have to have a director. You have to have someone who can make final cut and can help you make consistent decisions. It's just that that person can't do it by themselves, and they have to foster a team where designers are important, and researchers are important, and developers are important, and everyone's important. Everyone respects everyone else's opinions, and the team is being rewarded based on finding and executing on the good ideas. And so that means that's a team in which the designers are empowered, because everyone knows that they probably have a large proportion of the good ideas when it comes to interaction design. So you want to seek those out and execute on them.
So you just said something that, again, spawned another question. I think there's a theme to that. I've been doing that all through the panel. But you said something about you have to have a high-performance team. So let's talk about recruiting for a second. And this obviously on Firefox that happens very organically. People surface as leaders. They're passionate. So the tough thing in recruiting is to find the passionate people and find the passionate people who have a good balance of passion, execution, and skills, right? How do you actually build a team, a high-performance team? And I think all of you guys represent company services that have high-performance teams. How do you do that? And I could run 2 panels on recruiting because I have such tremendous opinions about that. So,
one huge thing that I think is important is to hire people who are teachers, people who want to share. We running out of time?
We got about 15 minutes. Just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
People who want to share. It's incredibly important. Hopefully, you have an organization such that you share information even outside of your company, but at a minimum, you want people who want to share inside of the company. We were just talking about who's writing design, who's writing code, and you have the people who think that just because they can compile an Eclipse, therefore they own X. You get the people who understand what Fitts law is, therefore they own X. And the answer is, neither one of them really should be the ultimate owner of anything. Ideally, they're teachers. Ideally, the guy who can code can help teach the person who works in UI, who works in design, why it matters that something has to actually work at the end. Why performance matters. What are limitations around, a back-end system that are going to affect the user experience. The UI person needs to be able to sit down with a developer and explain to them, how cognitively somebody's going to be, engaged through the front end of a UI. They got to be able to talk. They got to be able to share.
Okay, so you're saying that one tenet of someone that would be a part of a high-performance team is collaboration.
Yeah.
That they can collaborate well. What are the other tenets? I buy that totally, and I don't want to talk about how we test for that because that's the tricky part, is to find out, is this guy really collaborative? And I have a strong belief that the smartest people can't make the best and high-performing team. I actually believe that it's like McNamara's fallacy, right? You measure smarts, but that's not measuring anything else, but you get stuck up on smart. What are the other tenets? That there's collaboration. What else do you look for in a high-performance team?
For a team that's willing and people that are willing to admit when they're wrong and fix it. So often people get tied to one idea or one frame of thought, and presented with evidence, they're not willing to be open to listen to the negative feedback and do something about it. You want a set of people that are passionate, but not so passionate that they get blinded by that passion. And sometimes you get sort of high ego, high passion people who are right even a large portion of the time, but the 20% of the time that they're wrong, they drive the boat in the wrong direction as fast as possible because they're so good at their job, but their judgment's off, and they can wreck the boat before anyone even realizes what has happened. And so you're looking for people who are open to criticism and seek it out. Especially if you're working on a public product like Mozilla or Office that has a large number of users, you can find no shortage of negative feedback, about anything. And you want people that are willing not to like close the browser, but read it, learn from it, take it in perspective, but then be willing to make improvements based on it.
What I like is that both of you guys, both your answers had nothing to do with skills and stuff. I mean, you were talking about the soft stuff, right? And that's kind of the point. I think the takeaway from that is that we get really hung up in recruiting on the technical stuff, right? Can this guy come up with the best idea on the whiteboard in the next 60 minutes? There are some people who just don't think that way, right? Can this guy, write the best string reversal algorithm that's recursive, right? Just some people don't think that way. I think that it's this stuff that's important. Collaboration, humility. I mean, continuing. What else do you think is another strong tenet of?
So I think kind of similar to that is adaptability. I think that the singular mistake I've seen people do over and over again is they bring in someone who's really good at one thing because that's the thing they need right now. And then 6 months from now, when things are totally different, which they always are, that person who, if they're not willing to be adaptable or not interested, then it's a total mess. So I think that the high-functioning teams are passionate, they're collaborative, they're willing to take negative feedback, and they're adaptable. So they're willing to change their tools, they're willing to change their strategy, they're willing to be agile as a team to completely change what they're doing. Those are the teams that execute over and over again in terms of building great products, because it's not just build the same thing over and over again. It's adapting to the new reality of today, which may be very different than 6 or 12 or 18 months ago.
Yeah. Well, I would actually love to talk about this stuff more. But I think at this point we've actually got to stop. We've got about 15 minutes to take questions. So you guys have been listening pretty intently, so thank you for that. If you have questions, start lining up against the mic, and yeah, let's have them.
Can you guys talk a little bit about your testing processes? How you have requirements, and then once the developers will develop, whatever the end of the delivery is. How do you test that, and then how do you gauge success on that?
So in Office, we use a process that we call feature crews, which is to say that for every feature in the product, which is defined pretty discreetly, we have hundreds of feature crews. There's someone from every discipline who's involved in it. Design, program management, development, and testing. And from the ideation stage all the way through the end, all of those people are involved. So we don't go through a testing phase of the product. Anytime that there's a daily build that code has gotten checked into, test is involved in the check-in. They're involved in looking at that build and verifying that it's correct. And in fact, we've empowered test to be the sort of first guard keeper of the user experience, which is to say they test the user experience not just to make sure that things are functional, but to make sure that they're good. And so we've taken a set of people that used to be very technical and just thinking about, the button was supposed to do X and now it does X, to actually start thinking about aesthetics and think about user experience and to be sort of our first line of defense. Because often in Office, they see the code before anyone. They see the code before it even gets checked in. So that's sort of, testing is joined to the hip from the very beginning. It's not a throw it over the wall thing for us.
What do you test against, though? So do you guys have, how do you capture your UX? So I think he was talking about requirements, too. How do you validate that you're testing the right thing?
Again, I don't want to monopolize, but for us, some of those things are coded in the requirements from the beginning. So things like performance, something like, this thing can only take 100 milliseconds. No matter what, it has to take 100 milliseconds. Those kind of things are easy to codify. The rest of it is about teaching, right? It's about teaching them the fundamentals of user experience such that they can recognize when something's not right. And smart people often pattern match really well. So if you have very public meetings where you discuss design and they see, me or Dan or Mike, talking about something, then they start to think, well, this is the kind of thing Jensen talks about. Maybe I should bring up because I've seen something that sort of falls into that pattern. So there's just so much teaching that has to go on in a team so that every member in every discipline starts to get it. Yeah. Maybe they're not perfect at it, but so that's Office. You guys probably have different perspectives.
I'm assuming that testing is just so integral to your process, Mike.
Yeah, well, it's hard to map because we have a very hybrid process in how we do things. So we do some very traditional things where we will write test plans and as we're developing new features, have a small team that we'll try and do directed testing on those things. But I think that in general, for the size of project we're working on, we rely on a lot of public testing. So that's why I said earlier we have 50,000. These are normal people who just do run our daily builds. We have, I think, 500,000 people on our betas right now. And we're constantly managing feedback channels on those to see what people are talking about. And then we also augment with community testing events. So we'll actually, we're doing one on Friday, which is for Beta 4 of Firefox 3, where anyone in the world can join our test day. And we'll have a particular set of theme areas that we want people to look through and work on. And it's both directed testing in the sense that we want you to specifically look at this stuff, and a little bit more of the informal, just try it out. And you can tell by the questions people are asking. Like, I'm not sure if this is supposed to work this way or that way, is often a clue that the UI isn't actually guiding them in terms of what they're doing. So even if they, you explain to them and they understand it, you still may have a problem with that particular piece of the UI, because it ought to be mostly intuitive, especially for something like a browser. It's not something that should come with an instruction manual. You should just install it, and stuff should just happen and do what you expect it to do. And so if anyone's ever asking questions about, I'm not sure, but I'm just a naive user, that's where you really want to pay attention, because you probably got something wrong. So I think it's back to that constant feedback cycle and being sure to pay attention to both the specific and the subjective kind of feedback, and the questions people are asking and the kind of feedback they're giving.
More questions?
Good answer.
And we're done.
Oh, come on, I can't believe there aren't.
Getting back to that agile question that we were talking about earlier. So I've worked with the interaction designers who oftentimes will say that they don't want to actually start designing until they have all the requirements, because how can they design something optimally if they don't know what the requirements are to understand how to prioritize, expose features, et cetera, et cetera. So how have you guys dealt with that in the past?
I personally feel that requirements need to be designed. So I'm of the mindset that design is not just about design execution or production. I feel that a strategy needs to be designed. So I'm not necessarily just talking about a visual designer or an interaction designer who's ultimately responsible for doing a navigation model on a website or something else. But I feel like, just as I would say for a developer, there's really nothing that's stopping a developer from starting proof of concepts on various. As soon as you join a project, in general the area of expertise that you're working on, everybody can start something, is my belief. And from a design perspective, if you don't have requirements, there's a lot of things that can happen before that. You can do some guerrilla street ethnography. You can do competitive audits. There's all types of design activities that inform requirements. That said, you can still be very clear with your PM team or whatever team is responsible for articulating those requirements, saying, look, I really can't do a lot of detailed design work until I have X, Y, Z. And I think with a small team that's integrated and collaborative, that should happen naturally.
A pinpoint solution that you may be able to take back to your office tomorrow would be talking with your interaction designers and say, okay, you're telling me you need requirements. What's the minimum that you need so that you can start drawing up some sketches? What can we do here, so that I can get the ball rolling now? If you're coming to me and saying I need requirements, and that in that world maybe that means to you a 3-month process, to give them a binder, and they're just going to sit in their hands until that time. That's not going to work, and you have to figure out how to get them productive, sooner. Just talk to them and say, what do you need? You need a nugget? Do you need us to go and right now and do a brainstorming? Do I need to pull you off of here? And we start getting some ideas down on sticky notes, and you take those away, and you can start sketching that up. What is it that you need?
You might need new interaction designer.
Yeah.
When we did Agile, requirements was a sticky. And the program manager walked away with that, or the product manager walked away with that, and said, it's going to take me 3 days to do this. And we would put that guy's feet to the fire. Now, I can't say if that worked really well or not, but that was also another sort of stopgap solution that we had for requirements. More questions?
So you go through all this. You've got the team. Everyone's got the religion. You've got your tenets, and you put it out there, and it's a great piece of design. But the community, particularly, with something like Firefox, comes back with an even more elegant design. How do you respond to that? And how do you realign for that?
you take it and run with it. I mean, I'm not actually sure I understand the question. So, and maybe one of you guys do, but I think that it gets back to the point that you should never assume even your high-functioning team of experts always has all the great ideas. And so I think you should be willing to borrow and steal great ideas from wherever they come from. And the minute you realize that someone else has got a better idea, and if you can adopt it, you should run with it. And throw away any kind of, well, I didn't invent it, so it's not a great idea. Because that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, well, and in the GUI world, the folks at Xerox PARC invented everything 25 years ago. So there are sort of no totally new ideas. I think what you said resonated with me, which is around you guys often look at extensions that are very popular.
Yep.
Firefox, and then sometimes those get built into the actual product. We do that in Office as well. We look at what are the pieces of functionality that people are adding and that are getting downloaded a lot, and then we say, well, those things are resonating. Maybe we should look into that direction and build that directly into the product.
If you're getting feedback that is not in alignment with your religion, either you need to change your religion. Well, your religion needs to be rooted in the authenticity of the experience that you're designing for, right? So it should reflect, or the principles should be related to creating an experience that's really valuable and really engaging to the people you're talking to. And if it's not, you have to take a hard look at those fundamental things that that your team has been driving for and be detached. And I think this idea of just running with it is great. But having clarity around whether that's a group that you want to go after, there's a lot of business strategy that would then you'd have to look at.
Well, and in a broad mass market product, we have a lot of users.
Yeah.
There are some crazies also, right? Like there are people that believe that this is the right way to go, and if you actually followed them, everyone else would be aghast. Right. So you also have to run it through your filter of tenets and what you believe in. But if a significant number of people are saying, "Hey, this feels right," then you should think about that.
Could I do a quick time check? When the red light's blinking, does that mean I have left? Gotcha. So we can still take more questions for 7 minutes. Thanks, guys. Nobody wants to throw like a grenade out there? Because those are the fun ones.
Uh-oh.
I'll throw a grenade out there.
Awesome.
Cool.
So I think you guys are all awesome. And I would have come here if it was any one of you on the panel. And I read your blogs. I watch your stuff come out. It's really neat. But one person or one group that's kind of missing from this is Apple. I mean, we have the laptop, of course, but nobody hears from Apple. I was wondering if you think that Apple does a good job in their designs, or does Apple have a good marketing team? And like my own experience at my company, when we have questions about design, we always say WWAD, what would Apple do? And the idea there is you want to keep it simple but sexy. What do you guys think?
What do you think, Dan?
I think both. I think they've got some good design. They've got one hell of a good marketing team, too, that will sell anything. And they've got religion behind them. They've got 20 years of religion behind them, So it's both. The notion that your internal philosophy on design is based on what another company would do, you may want to rethink that. I mean, it should be something that you guys own. It shouldn't be, there may be people, not maybe at this conference, but out there that would say, what would 37 Signals do? Or what, some of these companies that have these big ideas and say, we do it this way, and other companies say, we're going to do it that way, we're going to do it the way Google does or whatever. It's not always the best way to go. It's tough because you're not that company. You're not Apple. You're not 37 Signals. You're not Google. You're not Microsoft. You've got your own position. You've got your own way to do things. Apple makes a lot of mistakes. And it's yeah.
So unfortunately, I think I misunderstood. I thought I had 7 minutes left. I'm 7 minutes over. So I got my knuckles whacked. I would love if you gave these guys a round of applause for coming here and sharing all this stuff.